Good morning, everybody. This is Bill Kennedy, and I want to welcome everyone on the call with us today. And I want to thank all my other partners and staff for assisting me in this webinar. And I want to welcome Mayor Martin Walsh. Welcome, Mr. Mayor. And I want to welcome Dr. Karilyn Crockett. And welcome, Dr. Crockett. And I welcome you to another webinar. It's a conversation about equity and justice in the city of Boston. And I look forward to this conversation. Mr. Mayor, before we begin the conversation on this topic, I would ask if you could please give us a bit of an update of the city today with COVID-19. If you could sort of do what you do on a daily basis about some of your concerns today overall and so forth. And before you answer, I do want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, for your leadership throughout your administration, but particularly since March on this issue. It just seems that the particular issues never stop coming. And I want to thank you for your leadership and your compassion for all of us during this time. So if you just please give us a sort of an update or status report of the virus in the city today.
Well, first of all, thank you, Billy, and thank you for your friendship over the years, and thank you everyone at Nutter. I want to thank Dr. Crockett for being with us today. She's an amazing person, and we'll get to hear from her in a little bit and have a dialogue conversation. As everyone pretty much understands, COVID, it continues to be one of the biggest challenges that Boston has ever faced. And in many respects, Boston has risen to the challenge. We've had to reorientate life in a city of 700,000 people while keeping students fed when we had to shut our schools down, engaged. We had to care for our most vulnerable, the homeless population and folks, elderly population, keeping our city running. And I'm proud that I was on a call a little right before this with some schools. It's been great to see our city come together and to look out for each other in different ways and helping each other out. So I appreciate it. I want to start by thanking everyone listening today for the part you did. And you might be saying, well, my only part was staying home. That was part of it, staying home and not spreading the virus. So thank you for doing that. Recently, we've seen an increase of COVID activity, both in numbers of cases and positive test rates in the city of Boston. In Massachusetts, as of yesterday, there were 986 new confirmed cases, bringing the total cases in Massachusetts of COVID-19 to 143,927. That's the highest one-day increase since May 30th. We also had 30 new deaths yesterday, bringing total deaths in Massachusetts to 9,589. In Boston yesterday, we had 88 new cases for a total of 19,117. And we had 4 people that passed away yesterday, bringing our total 776. Our citywide positivity rate at this moment is 5.7%. These are numbers that we haven't seen since May. Quite honestly, last week we're at 4.4%. And when we saw the number to 5.7 this week, it really, for me, it was a little alarming because it's been the largest increase we've seen in quite some time. The data tells us that the uptick that we're seeing in the last few weeks has continued and is potentially accelerating. We continue to make testing widely available and encourage anyone who is concerned about exposure to get tested. As a matter of fact, we want to try and get everyone tested. So you should be tested frequently. And, go to if you live in Boston, you go to a health center, you can go to boston.gov and you can find out locations. I think it's really important for us to really get an accurate number of where we are with the virus right now. We're encouraging people to stay vigilant and follow the health protocol. Wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands, stay at home when you feel sick. Parties are happening a lot in the city of Boston, and a lot of people are doing parties because they feel that they can't go out and they can't go to the bars or the clubs you used to go to. So you get 4 or 5 or 10, actually more than 4 or 5, more like 10 or 15 or 20 people in your house for a party. That's dangerous. That's potentially a super spreader. And we're asking people, because since the month of March through now, everyone's been very, very good in keeping their distance and doing what they need to do, and we get the numbers under control. If we don't start to pay a little more attention and be a little more vigilant on that, we're going to see these numbers continue to rise. We continue to focus on equity to make sure people have the supports they need. And what we're doing, the way we're living right now is what living with COVID looks like. In order for us to move forward and recover, we need to contain the spread of the virus and prevent outbreaks from turning into a surge. So I just ask everyone to do that. And Billy, thank you for letting me start with that, because as much as we'd like to be thinking we're in the end of the virus, I remember in the very beginning of the virus, I equated it to a baseball game. And I said, very early days, might have been in April, while we were in this virus for a month or so, I said, we're still in the first inning. And I don't know exactly where we are in the baseball game, but I know we're not in the seventh. We're probably more like in the fifth or sixth inning right now. And it really is incumbent upon all of us to do what we need to do to be able to move our society forward.
Well, just to follow up, I personally feel some days that we have become too casual at times. I do sense that. I do sense that as I might walk around down here in the Seaport or parts of the neighborhood where we live. I do sense sometimes that we become a little too casual. Of course, the college students coming to Boston, I think that's been impactful. I know you've worked with the universities and the colleges so actively to try to help in that regard. Some schools did not have students back. On the board of Emmanuel, and we're all remote and down there in the hospital area. But do you see any particular? You mentioned house parties. Do you agree with the population that the governor's talked about, that 29 or 19 to 39 as being a real area as part of the spread?
Yeah, that's what we're seeing right now. The spread in Boston is happening in two areas. One is people under the age of 30. And in fairness to the colleges, they have a very aggressive testing protocol. And,
Yes.
We've seen certain outbreaks in colleges, but they're not the large reason why we're seeing the number outbreak between the 29s and under, or 30s and under. I think it's really people having house parties, I think not wearing masks. The second population that we're seeing with the biggest increase is the Latino community. And part of that is because intergenerational families living together. I definitely think that there is language and access barriers there that people are dealing with. And quite honestly, a lack of real good health options or lack of people thinking they don't have options to health. And we'll get into disparities in a little bit here in the conversation, but health disparities. And those are all adding to it. In the chat, I don't know if I'm supposed to address it, but Samantha said we need another lockdown. Samantha, we're probably heading towards that potentially at some point. And I think that what we're doing now in the city is we closed all in-person learning in our schools, and we're currently looking at how do we have to roll back some regulations. The governor yesterday rolled back regulations on hockey, ice hockey, because they were able to trace, because of the contract tracing, they were able to trace back to 30 clusters that were responsible through hockey. So we're actually doing the tracing and watching. So I don't know if we're at a point where we have to shut everything down. But I'll tell you right now, if we don't stop this trend, and it is a trend, we've seen 5 weeks now from 2.8% to 5.7%. If we don't turn that trend and that trajectory keeps going up, then we're going to be at a situation where we are shutting things down. The national experts, the doctors and national experts have said that the months of November and December and January are going to be very difficult months. We're going to see these increases in numbers all over the place. But they also said in the next breath that we have the ability amongst individually to actually to slow the spread of the virus down by wearing masks, Billy, what you just said, but by physical social distancing. If you're a runner and you're running, have a mask on or have a mask in your hand, and as you're coming up on people, throw the mask on, because again, it's about, if you feel, you might feel safe, but it's not about you. It's about the people around you. If you feel that you're immune to the virus, well, that's okay. God love you for doing that. But understand that you could be asymptomatic and could be a carrier and spreading it all over the place. So again, it's about all of us, the common courtesy of supporting each other as citizens.
Do you agree with the use of the word fatigue, that people have sort of, I don't want to say grown weary or tired, but this process now, as you said, started in March, and so some people thought there were certain days or certain dates that you wouldn't have it anymore, but those dates have all gone by. and now as we approach the holiday, do you think people are fatigued by this?
Well, I think that people want to get back into society. I think we want to go back into, listen, I'm a season ticket holder for the Patriots. There's nothing more than I'd love to be at the Patriots game, watching the Patriots play. People want to be in sporting events. People want to have their kids playing Pop Warner football. People want their kids in school. We want to bring our college students back, but unfortunately, we're in a worldwide pandemic, and the last generation of people that lived through something like this in America was 1917, 1918. It carried into 2 full years of the Spanish flu. We're going to have a new normal here in a lot of different aspects of life. We're going to have a new normal when it comes to how we're dealing with the virus. We're going to have a new normal we're going to be wearing masks. We're going into next year. We're going to be still talking about physical social distancing into next year. We're still going to be seeing spikes into next year. So I think that, we have to learn to live with the virus. And I think that from March of this year to today, we certainly know so much more. And as individuals, citizens, we know so much more, and we know what to do to treat the virus. And I think we'll even learn more as we get into the end of the year and the beginning of next year. Everyone's kind of waiting for this vaccine to be the saving grace, but even with the vaccine, we still have to be careful. So I would just ask people, if you can, if you're struggling out there, number one, and you just don't know, you're just at wit's end, talk to somebody, make a call to a professional. There's nothing wrong with that. Talk to friends about it. I'm in recovery, so, I have that outlet with recovery to be able to jump on an AA meeting in Zoom or talk to another person in recovery and talk through the emotions and the feelings that I'm going through. I think that it's really important for us as people to have that outlet, to be able to share whatever's on your mind. That's a sign of strength to be able to talk to someone else. So I think that we have to do more of that. We've done that in the city. We've increased our counseling capacity, and we're also working in our schools. I mean, our kids are going through some really, really difficult times because of their whole life has changed, and they can't really understand why their life has changed. So there is a lot that we can do.
Yeah. Well, you're right about the social connection. I mean, when I talked to you a month ago about scheduling this call today, I think the phrase that we said to each other was, "Hey, Bill," or "Hey, Mr. Mayor, it's good to hear your voice." I find myself saying that more and more when I get a call from a friend, or when I make a call. That association is so important. So you are right on that, and it's good to connect with people. But thank you very much for that. If there's one thing I have learned is how many people rely on the city, and I do want to give you a compliment. We did have the Shattuck Awards last week, and you participated in that, and we celebrated city employees, and we celebrated all city employees, not just the awardees, for all the work they've done during this pandemic. So congratulations to you, and thank you to you and to all of the city employees for what they've done. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that.
Billy, thank you. And you better start asking Dr. Crockett some questions, because the chat's lighting up. People didn't come to hear me. Okay. She's a rock star and a friend.
I'm going right to her.
And she's the best. Right, so we got. I'm going to start. I'm not going to. Everyone on the webinar, I'm not going to talk for the next 35 minutes. I'm going to let Karilyn Crockett do all the talking. Okay.
Dr. Crockett, welcome, Dr. Crockett. And Doctor, I share an issue with you. My daughter is a graduate of the Windsor School, just like you. So I know you're a talented, competent professional. So she's the class of 2007, and the mayor knows it well. Why do we need this office of equity? And I'd like you to talk about the office, how you envision it, where you see as challenges. Now, the mayor's been committed to equity as long as I've known him, over 20 years. And so when he talked in 2016 at the chamber, I had heard that, but as mayor, he made that commitment. He also has said that systemic racism is a public health crisis. And so I ask you, Doctor, and the mayor can join as well, but the mayor created this office. He put it in the cabinet level. He asked you to be the first head of it. So could you please talk about your background a little bit? You were in city government, I know. But if you could talk about that, and then talk about how you and the mayor envision the Office of Equity going forward, and in the agenda and the initiatives that you hope to put forward. Okay? Thank you, Dr. Crockett.
You wound it up for me very nice, Bill. Thank you. So
You're
thanks
welcome.
again for the chance to be here, and I just really appreciate Nutter making this this forum for us. You know, listening to the mayor, we talk about what this moment of the pandemic looks and feels like for us is so instructive and sobering, because I think we have an opportunity to really appreciate what it means to be in a city where our chief executive believes in data and research and is committed to making sure that the city's work is informed by science and informed by compassion. And so I'm delighted to be here with the mayor and to think about what that means. Before being appointed for this position at the end of June, I was teaching at MIT, and I'm a planning teacher, and also a researcher of public policy and urban history. And so as someone who also believes in the power of research and teaching and learning, it is not lost on me as a resident of this great city how important it is to be informed and led by the science. And so as we continue to work through this pandemic, again, we should be heartened and encouraged to know that we are sitting with a leader who has our best interest at heart and is making sure every day that we're doing everything we can to protect the entire city, and particularly our populations that have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic. As the chief of equity, I come to talk about and think through what it means to live in a twin pandemic. So the pandemic of COVID-19, but also the long-term, centuries-long pandemic of systemic racism. And so when the mayor created this position, it was really with this vision of saying we need to center equity as a lens in terms of what the city is doing, our daily operations, our policies, our planning efforts, from top to bottom. How can all of the city's 50 plus departments and agencies, all of its 18,000 employees be charged to think through equity? And to make sure it's driving and embedded in all of our work. And so that is the charge. I come representing communities all over the city. Our immigrant populations, our Office of Immigrant Advancement, Office of Women's Advancement. I have to send a shout out here to Nutter, because you all have been so generous and supportive of our work in terms of supporting childcare entrepreneurs, people who are really dealing with the front line of our young people and keeping them safe and healthy, and Nutter is a partner for us in that work. Thinking about language and communications access, the newly relaunched Human Rights Commission, Office of Diversity, the Office of Resilience and Racial Equity. So these are teams that are part of the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet. It's the first time the city has had this level of work. A cabinet level appointment for equity is no small feat. But what is more important is to think about what that means over time. So I come to this work as a lifelong Boston resident, right? I'm born here, born in Dorchester. And so I know well what it means to just look at the city from the neighborhood level, from the family level, from even my own family's work to try to make Boston live up to its promise. My family comes from West Virginia. We were coal miners, truly. My great-grandfather was a coal miner in Excelsior, West Virginia. When the mines became mechanized and folks lost their jobs, my family came to Boston to look for opportunity and promise for all of us who were yet to be born. What they did not know is they would encounter a city in its own crisis. In the 1950s and 60s, the city was losing population, was losing money, was really struggling to figure out its future. And we were in the midst of that. So it is an honor and a privilege to have the opportunity to serve the city and to really think about what it means to making sure that access to opportunity, that wellness, health, and just prosperity is something that is real for not just a few families here and there, but for all families, and families like mine who continue to struggle to make the city work for them. So I take that to the deepest depth of my heart and really work on trying to figure out how government can live up to that.
How do you intend, are you already interacting with the various city departments. I know the mayor talked last week about the police department, of course, and talked about your role in that and the Office of Accountability. But just generally, if you look around the table at a cabinet level, you look at the various heads of folks who are in the cabinet and department heads, how do you envision yourself working with those folks? And you can talk about the police particularly, but how do you see yourself in your office working with the various departments?
Sure.
And what objectives?
Sorry, Bill, I'm excited. You see me ready to go. So I have very much hit the ground running in this job. This is the first appointment of a chief of equity, and I'm new in this role, but I was in the city for 4 years as the chief of equity, the director of economic policy and research. Straighten me out. Working with John Barrow. So we did a lot of work with a bunch of different departments, and so coming in this role, what I've done immediately was to schedule one-on-ones with chiefs and department heads to do a scan of policy. So I'm in the midst of that right now, really looking at what's working in different departments and agencies, and talking with leadership about their vision of equity and how we can further advance the work. So very directly being able to deliver to the mayor a landscape, a sense of what's happening in terms of racial equity, in terms of economic inclusion and health equity, and then what isn't happening. So that's a piece of work that I'll pivot to at the end of this year, the beginning of next year, is to try to dismantle some things that we know are not working. So there's a big portion of this that is about looking literally about how equity is embedded in the work or is not, calling that out, and also doing the work of standing up the Racial Equity Fund, which is a very important tool that the mayor launched in June as well, to say, there is an opportunity here to think about not only racial justice in this moment of reckoning, but also over time. What does that mean for generational change? And the work that you're calling out, Bill, in terms of the police reform task force, that's front and center. So I'll let the mayor talk a little bit about that, because that is a particular victory there, particularly because he's called out all the recommendations in support of them. So there's work there to be done, but I'd love to have the mayor talk a little bit about that work and how important it is for us.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. I was in the chat, James. Just so James Jacobson, when you sent me a question, you talked about equity in other sense means investment. When you talk about for real in communities of color, if you could just be specific on what I meant by the question back to you was public investment, private investment, or both. Because there is investments being made, and I think the question is, do we make more targeted investments in different areas? And we'll get into your question in a second if you just want to throw that back in there. A lot of, let me just real quickly, where Karilyn framed it in a great way. 2020 has been a year of reckoning in the United States. We're reckoning with inequalities, injustices. And these inequalities and injustices have persisted in America for too long. At a time, we need leadership on a national level. We don't have that. So it's really incumbent upon cities to fill the void in leadership. When I say cities, I don't necessarily just mean mayors. I'm talking about teams of people. We understand how systemic racism has played out in everything from health outcomes. We've seen it front and center here with COVID, to job prospects, to housing discrimination. And that's why we need to take a deeper look inside our systems to root out our nation's racist legacy and to rebuild those systems to create equitable opportunities for all. So a couple of things we've done is, and we'll get into a little bit, but racism is a public health crisis, something that was really important. We shifted funding to health equity, trauma response, and obviously eviction prevention and communities, and we can go more into that in a little bit. But the police reform task force. What happened there was we put together a group of people that went out and were given a charge to look at policing in the city and to come up with some recommendations on what people would think about and what they would do to change it. I was not part of the task force. I was in the first meeting, thanking them to be on there, and I was given a briefing at a different one, at a different meeting, talking about where we're going. So the recommendations that came out last week, the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency with full subpoena powers to investigate misconduct. This is where the civilian review board will sit. This is also where we're going to create a space inside City Hall, not in City Hall and not at the police department, but in a different city building, where people can come forward and file a complaint against the police officer if they feel they were mistreated or misconduct happened. And then this office will take it over, and we'll have a civilian review board that's going to be looking at it, and there's a process. A diversity and inclusion unit in the Boston Police Department to work with the the representation for equity and for officers of color. So what's going to happen here is we have a chief diversity officer in the police department, but we're changing that. We're creating a diversity inclusion unit. That unit will be working with Karilyn. Karilyn's cabinet will work cross department with the police department on creating this unit and making sure that this unit actually, it's not going to be one person, it's going to be a group of people, making sure that the department has fair representation, not just on the rank and file police department either, on civilian side of it. We're going to work to expand the body-worn camera program. And that program is here. The body-worn cameras are in Boston. And I think we have 1,000 officers wearing them. And what we're doing now is working on overtime and some of the other times where officers will have them on. The city council bans biometric and facial recognition technology. We don't use it. They banned it. So that's not going to happen. The use of force policy. To articulate a clear disciplinary code. We don't have chokeholds here in Boston. That's one of the things that a lot of police departments around the country, but we're going to look at these use of force policies every year. And that's, again, another area of Karilyn's office to make sure that these processes are up and running. Expand public access to police policies, procedures, and data for the police department. That's creating a data dashboard, and we're going to be doing that. And then all of this, the timeline for all this work is 180 days. There is other things to it as well. We'll need legislative changes. We'll need some contract changes. But the basic principle of what I said. Now, this was created and done to build on the work of creating trusts, but also built on the work of where there's real problems. And you have to acknowledge, I'm acknowledging that we have issues. And this acknowledgement of it and the response to that acknowledgement of it, it's not my response, it's our response again. And I think that there's a natural kind of bridge that between City Hall and the mayor's office, Karilyn's office, the police department, and other parts of government. So that's kind of a little bit of it.
Mayor, could I ask a question?
Yes.
Is where do these initiatives all you believe that they're necessary, and I do too, but where is the point where you're also at the same time concerned about the level of public safety in the city, and the policing that's going on, and so forth, and so that the citizens are confident that they're being protected and so forth by the police department. How do you strike that balance at the same time as you're making these reforms? And how will Karilyn do that? How will Dr. Crockett do that as part of her mission as well?
I think that when you talk, it shouldn't be an either or. The police department have a job, and their job is to keep the citizens of Boston safe and help in any way they can. I mean, it's not an either or where we're going to do reforms and we're not going to do our work. We're not seeing what other places are seeing around the country. The violence and the crime that we've seen increase this year, quite honestly, we haven't done an expert study to come back and say what it is, but a lot of it's COVID-19. It's people that aren't working. It's people that a lot of things stopped back in March. And I think that, it's been isolated incidents, but we've seen, last year we had a 20-year low in homicides. This year we have, as of last night, which was 28 homicides for the year. As of last night, we had 46, I believe it was. We had one last night, the first one in a month. But when you go back and look at all these, when I go back and look at, somebody who's lost a life or taken a life, generally their story is very similar, that somewhere along the road, society's failed them. And, they've either dropped out of school or they didn't have any real opportunity. They turn to they don't necessarily turn to violence at first. They get caught up in the cycle of poverty, the cycle of racism. And then eventually, they're too far in. And we've seen programs, and we've created programs that have actually helped young people that have been court involved, gang involved, getting to the building trades or getting into coding and things like that. It works. And I think that, to your question, Billy, I think that as a city, we shouldn't be asked for a STEM. I mean, when I came out with these recommendations, most police officers didn't even say anything to me. The union made a statement about it, but it's not about trying to pay somebody back. It's about building trust. I mean, those protests that happened and demonstrations that happened after George Floyd got killed. And I said this, I talked to Karilyn about this. I just felt it was different. And I felt it was different because it just seemed like there was much more, I don't know the right word is, momentum, and there was much more focus on actually real change. That happened 5 months ago. That tension, or that attention, I should say, is still very much front and center. At least I can speak for Boston. And I didn't turn the page, and we can't turn the page. And I think there's a lot of work we have to do. And I'm looking through, there's a lot of things in here about budgets and funding and things like that. I mean,
Yeah.
we can get in. Anyone who asks a question, by the way, we'll get you answers to your question if we don't get to it today. But it's more than money. I mean, we're making investments. We're going to make investments in budgets, and we're going to make investments in communities, and we're going to do that. And we're working with the private sector to make more investments in young people of color to build wealth and to be able to start companies and things like that have been not been there. But I think that through Karilyn's efforts in her office, it is cross-departmental, it is cross-cabinet, and it's also, we hope, and I think I'll stop after this, it's not just City Hall. It spills out into the business community. It spills out into the nonprofit sector. It spills out to every single person that's talking on Twitter. I mean, on the chat here. You don't work for the city, so it has to happen in your industries as well. I'll go back to you, Karen.
No, it's great. And I think that's exactly right. We know that we can't do this work alone, and we shouldn't. That's not how you get to transformation. Transformation is personal. It starts by listening and by being honest. And particularly around your question, Bill, around the police reform work that the mayor just laid out, it wasn't about appointing a task force and having them sit in a dark room or a dark Zoom by themselves. There was a robust public process around rethinking what it means to bring full transparency and accountability to the BPD. And that's been a part of a longer history of community organizing and work to make sure that the Boston Police Department is a police department that we can be proud of. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but I think very much about the 90s, when we were in a very different time in our city in terms of unrest, in terms of violence and crime, and the way that the clergy, organizers, the Black Ministerial Alliance and folks came together to hold the police force to task and to really make it so that we were in a much longer term conversation around engagement, about having the public really weigh in on the police force, use of force, policies, tactics, and procedures, so that Boston is not engaged in this conversation for the first time this year. This has been a longer term effort. And so to have the mayor really take leadership on this and to demand that there's a public process, to demand that we go deeper than just thinking about police reform. When we think about the protests that are still going on in many places in the wake of George Floyd's murder, it's not just about police reform. It's a much larger statement on the state of a racial injustices that leave people in communities, in cities, and in a country that overlooks them, that does not protect them, that doesn't have their best interests or their life and well-being at heart. So that's the work that's causing a much deeper conversation. The police reform work is essential, but it's also important to drive down change through all these institutions in our city, and that's the work that we're about.
Well, that's the follow-up question I had is, I know the police department maybe is different, but will a similar approach, recent approach, be applied to all city departments, whether it's health and hospitals or whether it's school department or whether it's the fire department? will you also be looking as part of your mission at all these departments, Dr. Crockett?
Absolutely. And so, as I mentioned, so my one-on-one conversations with chiefs and department heads and commissioners is really asking those questions, kind of getting inside of their operations, their policies, and being able to provide a scan across all of our work. That's crucial. And so being able to lift up the hood and see what's going on is important. And what I'm learning is that COVID is really teaching us some really hard lessons about what it means to not support our communities, Black and Brown communities, our essential workers, our seniors, folks who have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic. And chiefs and department heads are really thinking a lot about what else they can do to shift policies or resources or even their operations as we get ready to come into a very different version of government. A lot of folks are working remotely across the city. That includes City Hall. And so we know that when people finally come back to work, when it's safe to do so, that it will not be business as usual. All the things that we're learning about bringing the city into health, wholeness, into recovery, will actually have to affect the way that we govern. And so my appointment is evidence of that, evidence of the mayor's commitment to creating structural change in the structure of government and in our operations. And much of that will have to continue because of all that we're learning about in this moment of crisis. And so that will absolutely affect every department, agency, commission, and we're learning about how to do that right now.
As you've looked under the hood of each department, or the ones you've looked under so far, are you surprised by what you found, or what you haven't found, or haven't seen, or learned?
I think there is a desire to think about what equity means as one kind of organizing principle. I'm finding that people have very different understandings of what equity means. For me, equity is about bringing people to similar outcomes. So the question is, what would it mean if you could not predict my wealth or my health or my economic opportunities or outcomes based on race, gender, sexuality, money in the bank? If I took all that out, we should be able to have the same opportunities, the same lifespan, and we know that's not the case. And so what I'm learning from chiefs and in the conversations with leadership is the desire to kind of get us to a place where that's true. So residents of the city of Boston are demanding that. They deserve it. They're looking to the mayor and his leadership because he has been talking about this from day one. This is not a new conversation, but it's a new reality because people are hurting and suffering. And we have a responsibility and a real opportunity to be bold about how we address it. Government is front and center, but again, we cannot do this alone. We need Nutter, we need 1,000 Nutters, we need all the businesses, we need all the healthcare institutions, hospitals. We need everyone to join us, and I'm looking for partnership.
Mayor had talked about outside City Hall, and so as you are interacting with, like today, with the business community, the institutions, nonprofits outside of city government, what is, I participated in a program where you and the mayor talked to the chamber. What is your mission there, or your objective, or the message you're trying to convey to whether it's the nonprofit sector or the higher ed sector or the business community about your office and the mission that you and the mayor have for your office?
No, I think that I'm just looking through the chat. There was somebody asked a question about helping people pathways to good paying jobs. Mm. And I think when in the past, when we think about equity and inclusion, we talk about racism, we generally focus on whatever the issue is at hand, meaning that in the aftermath of George Floyd, a movement began to defund the police. And when McCann talked about, banning chokeholds, there was something that was put out right away. 8 can't wait, 8 recommendations that we signed on to. And when we think about systemic racism, it goes deeper than policing. It goes into whether it's health, whether it's education, whether it's job opportunities, whether it's wealth building, whether it's whatever the issue is. And I think the approach that we're taking in the city, and I think we've taken, I mean, I feel that we've taken it since I've been there, but there's been certainly a different lens that we're working now in a more urgent manner. And I think that the business community or the nonprofit community, it could simply be having somebody that works for you that is a person of color that is in the reception area of your office. It might not have had the opportunity to go to college, and provide them with the opportunity to maybe go back to college, and then provide them with an opportunity for a pathway into a law firm or an office, not just simply saying, oh, I hire. When I look at our hiring in the city, I can tell you on this call that since I've been mayor, 50% of the people that we've hired in the city are people of color. Okay, that's great. But how many people in the city of Boston have been promoted to managers? How many people in the city of Boston are promoted to department heads? How many people in the city of Boston have left the city, people of color, and gone on to make more money and more opportunity to build wealth for them and their family? What have you done? And it's about helping. How do we create this trajectory, this upward trajectory for people? Karilyn we all talk about the study of the state of the Fed that in 2015, the average Black family's net worth was $8. The average family white net worth is $267,000. And when you look at the bottom line of that, it's probably because the white family was able to buy a home. And was able to make some investments there, and the Black family can't buy the home for whatever reasons, the structural racism reasons that have been in place forever, whether it was redlining or lack of credit or what have you. And so when the question, Bill, you asked is, there's not one answer. It's all of us to take a look at and see. And I'm watching a lot of questions come in. What are we doing about this? What are we doing with that? And I appreciate the questions, but it's what are we doing as individuals? Karilyn worked in the city before. She worked in our Office of Economic Development and created, the programs on procurement and created the programs on a whole bunch of different programs. And we're not perfect with it. We have to do a better job. We have $680 million worth of private contracts, if you will, that go out to the city of Boston. The number 2 years ago was like 3% of that money went to businesses of color. That's brutal. That's terrible. And we're working towards changing it. The number's going to be better next time, but it's still going to be low. But you think that's $680 million. Collectively, all of the money outside in the private sector is so much greater. And if we can get everyone into the mindset of thinking about the importance of creating opportunity, that doesn't mean that we're not dealing with systemic racism. We're not putting it aside. I mean, we have to deal with racism, and we have to, as a society, work on racism. We can't just say, oh, we did a program, so I feel good now about myself. That might have worked in the past. It doesn't work in 2020. And if anything we've seen in the last 5 months, and I didn't finish my thought about the protests in the street, but the protests in the street, to people that are listening today, those protests really opened my eyes in the sense of there was real passion out there. Then the violence happened in cities in America, and people started saying, oh, here we go again. The violence overshadowed what the cause of the protest was. That should not be the case. Let's not forget, every single one of those protests, every single one of those demonstrations started out with different messaging. And we can't get hung up on what Trump's trying to say, oh, they're burning things down. That wasn't the point. The point was the protests and the passion behind those protests. And I think it's important for us to remember that as a society.
And again, just to jump on that point with the mayor, it's so crucial. Again, we have a mayor that recognizes that agitation, action, demonstrations are delivering a bigger message, that are offering a critique. We were just on a call a couple of days ago with Mayor Durkin from Seattle, and it was just so thrilling for me to see these two mayors in conversation, mayors who understand again that organizing and mobilization is a call to action for folks who sit in positions of power, for mayors, for governors, for corporate leaders, to recognize that a message is being offered. And so much of the message is a deep critique of systemic racism. And when we think about racism, we have to remember that racism is a logic. It's an organizing logic that essentially organizes our society based on a hierarchy of race, where we talk about the white race or white people, whatever that even totally is meant to sit at the top of this pyramid. And the rest of the folks are kind of at this kind of ladder to the bottom. And for a bunch of different political and economic reasons, we have decided that this is the way that our society is organized. And now people are saying, and have been saying, that is not only is it not okay, and not only is it unjust, but it's toxic. And we talk about the implications of that for generations. There's a real lesson there. The mayor talked about the racial wealth gap and the Fed's colored wealth report, a staggering and astonishing report. McKinsey followed up that study even last year and told us that the cumulative cost of the racial wealth gap in terms of the GDP, the country, is 1.5 trillion dollars of lost opportunity, income, and prosperity for the nation because of this organization, this logic by race that continues to not only repress our opportunity and earning power, but keeps us locked in this dance where we cannot be all of what we're meant to be. And so again, to have a mayor who understands that, who takes that as not only something to pay attention to, but the basis for change, structural change, investment change, policy change, that is a call to action and a call to arms for the rest of us. So just again, really appreciative of Nutter for having us on this call, and looking forward to being able to follow up with folks in terms of your comments in the chat and anyone else who wants to join with us, because we have a lot of work to do, and we mean to be serious, because the mayor's not getting tired. He's ready to go, and we need your help.
How do you, looking at the Office of Equity, Dr. Crockett, and the mayor, how will you assess the effect, you use the word, the success, the effectiveness, the impact of the Office of Equity and in the initiatives related to it? If we look back in 2023, and we look back to today and said, okay, did that office work? How effective was it? What criteria would you view or would you use to assess it as being successful?
Sure, a bunch of things, Bill. You know, someone did mention in the chat, they mentioned the Imagine Boston 2030 plan, which is an important planning document that gives us some guidance in terms of what it looks like to really center equity and inclusion in all the city's work and plan. You know, that plan was a genius intervention on the mayor's part for saying that it had been 50 years since the city had engaged in a comprehensive plan. And so if we really want to think about long-term sustainability and impact and inclusion for the city, we have to be guided by something that's giving us a sense of true north, which is actually the IB 2030 plan. And so in my conversation with leadership, I had been asking people, you know, what are the main pain points that are getting in the way of your ability to deliver on equity for your priority policy, and how do you measure that? And so between what's been laid out in IB 2030 and these very specific and targeted conversations with folks, this is an opportunity to align and to call out particular metrics that can give us a sense of how we're doing. It's not a new question for us or an unknown question. The mayor has been a champion of metrics, measurements, of dashboards. If he was sitting by his desk, he would be able to pivot around and show you all the dashboards that sit there and let us know how we're doing every day. And so we have to be able to measure and share that information. And so that's a new piece of work too, because I think the work is calling for new measurements.
Mr. Mayor, I know we're getting to 12, and I just have one last question for both of you, and particularly Mr. Mayor Walsh, is as you're thinking about and deal with the issues of race and equality and other issues exacerbated by COVID, this is a question I've asked people: what hope, or do you have hope, and what is it for the future? I know you're an optimistic person and so forth, but what is your hope for the future? And I asked Karilyn that as well, and Mr. Mayor.
I've watched since March. I've watched people in City Hall that their roles and responsibility are, whether it's in the BPDA or housing or what have you. I've watched them all just kind of come together, and there's no line anymore. Just crossing over to making sure that we're feeding people that need food, making sure we're delivering, whether it's Chromebooks to kids or doing wellness checks on seniors that we know are shut in, or all of or delivering materials in our neighborhoods. That sense of connectivity that we've all had together has been really, really important. And I think that as we move forward as a society, I think we've become a society, a very individualized society. We're all kind of by ourselves in our own little world. And I think the sense of community has been lost to some degree. And I think that if we can build that back up in our city moving forward, and having an understanding of each other, I think that's something that I hope comes out of this as we move forward here in the city. I think that, as we're chugging along here in COVID-19, and we got it under, I say not under control by the virus, but we were getting the systems in place. Then systemic racism came to the forefront. And I've watched even our team, Karilyn and other folks really making concerted efforts to really change the way we do business and understanding the importance of this time and the magnitude of this time. So I guess to answer your question is, I hope, Billy, that as we move forward down the road here through this pandemic, that there's a sense of real acknowledgement of the work that we have to do, and we continue to work collectively together for it. I was on a call right before this with some school leaders talking about an award ceremony for schools, and the pandemic of 1917, 1918. You think about what came out of that group of young people. Obviously, World War I was going on around that time. World War II, Korea, Civil Rights Movement, Vietnam. In Boston, we had busing and things like that that happened here. We label that generation as the greatest generation because they had to overcome so many obstacles. The challenges of this generation moving forward, it might not be a world war, but racism is a world war. It's a war that's being fought in every single country in this world. So we have, I think it's important for us. You asked, what's the metrics? There's no metric. I don't see a metric. I think it's laying down the foundation and the groundwork and being real intentional on our work moving forward. And like I said, there's a lot of chats in here. What can I do? What you can do is simply look in the mirror and look in your own companies and look in your own law offices to see what's the piece you can do, because systemic issues, systemic racism, systemic structures can be changed in one law office or one small office at a time. It doesn't have to be a grand old policy coming out of City Hall. It's changing a mindset. So I don't went on a little long there. I apologize. Turning back to you, Karilyn.
Well, it's gonna ask Dr. Crockett. Would you like to make I know we're at the 12. A final comment, Dr. Crockett. I want to thank you, you and the mayor for joining us today. But if you'd like to add a final comment as we wind up, I would appreciate it.
Thank you for that, Bill. A powerful question, and I'll answer in a way that I hope doesn't seem too, too tongue-in-cheek or too corny. But the mayor gives me hope, honestly, to think about how government is sort of putting itself in the center of enacting change, but thinking about how to make a difference. In terms of, again, economic opportunity, racial justice. This still is the city of Boston. That has not been our history, where Boston City Hall or our mayor has made a compassionate commitment to addressing and taking on big challenges that make us uncomfortable. And so as a student of history myself, I know the stories of the sort of the legacy of what has come out of so much of Boston City Hall. And so to know that government is seeing itself as not only a partner, but part of the transformation and part of the problem solving is remarkable. And some days I almost can't believe it that we're here and standing in it, because it's not easy. It's not obvious, but it's so important that we stand here and we kind of stand in this moment of trying to be uncomfortable together, but knowing that that's the only way that we can come up with some solutions. Sort of, I come again to this as someone very skeptical often of what government's role is and can be. And so just each day really inspired and moved and kind of sometimes overwhelmed by the awesomeness of what it means to be as a part of a city hall, at a mayor's office that's committed here, but that's what we need that's where we need to be. So hopefulness is a big word, and it's true.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Doctor. And I want, as the mayor will probably tell you, you will now be included in our programs here at Nutter, and we hope that you will join us, not just as a guest, but also as a participant. So you're always welcome, Dr. Crockett, with us. Mr. Mayor, as we say goodbye, is there any last word you'd like to give us, or anything you'd like to end the program on, Mr. Mayor?
No, but just thank everyone for being on here today. And just remember to, as we continue to move down this road of coronavirus, as I begin this, just, take care of yourself and take care of the people around you. We have to keep this under control, and vote on Tuesday, a week from Tuesday.
Well, we didn't even get into that today, but I want to thank you, Mayor Walsh, for your kindness and friendship to me and my family, and for the work you do, and to Dr. Crockett as well. And I want to thank everybody who's on the call, and of course my partners and associates here at the firm. Best wish to everyone, and have a good day. And thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Dr. Crockett, and thank you to everyone. Goodbye now. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.